Hello and welcome to Torty Talks. This is my 12th batch of stuff since I started doing these talks for Ambron Radio. I've been recording things for decades, literally, probably 6 decades, well, with help from various people who knew how to use a tape recorder when I was too small to. But that's one of the stories that are in one of the last 50 stories that I have spoken onto this wonderful medium that is the podcast. I am Simon Anthony, acting at torty.org.uk. Please call me, tell me what you think about these things, and settle down and enjoy this, my rant about Brexit and the environment and politics in general, plus 2 things repeated from about a year ago, because I haven't got time to make 2 new ones. I thank you. Bikes. I've never been all that fond of exercise. I was born large and, all being well, have every expectation of remaining that way. For me, unnecessary movement is to be avoided at all costs. That does not mean I aim to be permanently indolent. Even though it is true that I spend a lot of my life in front of a computer screen, I spend at least some of it, several days a week in fact, on my bike. But enough minutes pass in each of them to have worn out my saddle a few times. The concept of going for a ride for fun has never held much of an appeal for me. Where can there possibly be any fun in risking life and limb on today's roads? Just looking away for a moment at a cow or some other object of interest allows any nearby car a chance to cut you up, and it will, so I don't, so I see nothing, so it isn't fun. I tend to stay in a lot of the time. Computing does that to you. Wherever I do have somewhere to go, as long as it isn't far or uphill, I cycle, but not for the fun of it. People say I must be very fit, despite my size, because I do go everywhere on a bike. But even though my bike is called a racer, that doesn't make me one. Racer is the name given to any bike that is neither a sit-up-and-beg machine, as used by grocers' boys of yore, nor a tank-like off-road beast beloved at the weekend, stick it on the roof rack and we'll go for a ride somewhere nice brigade. I go at a steady speed as set by the largest gears I have. My legs are strong but not fast, so it takes me quite some effort to get going at all. But once I'm off, my velocity is quite acceptable, although nothing like racing standard. I have another reason for cycling, apart from the physical effort. I hate cars. I always have. This was made easy for me by growing up in a family that didn't itself feel bereft by not having one, which we didn't. My father still cycles, my mother did once, but fell off and dislocated a finger on her first attempt as an adult, and it stuck to 3 wheels ever since. It is a wonder to me that I ever rode a bike again after that. Normally I'd follow my mother's example come what may, but even though any sort of physical effort leaves me cold in a hot sort of way, I kept at cycling. Not very assiduously, as I didn't go anywhere at all for 20 years, and so a tree grew through my bike's pedal, left as it was in the garden. The tree is still quite well. That bike, however, is long gone. Long gone, too, is the first bike which I really used. It was a dislike of the journey to work which forced me onto 2 wheels again. I took that bike back and forth for several years until I finally realised that I hated cycling even more than I hated commuting. It didn't do my health much good either. Many was the time after a short ride when I would have to lie down for 10 minutes or more to get the wheezing noise in my chest to lessen a bit. As the smog grew worse over the years, my time on my back increased. I stopped using the bike finally when I realised I'd hit a car, or been hit by one, on average once every 6 months for 2 years. Enough was enough, at least until I moved out of London. The streets of Nottingham are a bit hillier than my old route to work. The traffic was comparatively lighter and the air proportionately cleaner, so I took up the pump one more time. The first few occasions made my life just as miserable as riding had ever made it, but I kept it up, and after only a few years became inseparable from my trusty wheeled steed. From time to time I still meet people who are lost in admiration for one such as I, who can move without 4 wheels. I have been known to walk places too. This is also, though, highly irregular, and maybe even slightly revolutionary in a counterculture sort of way. Glad I am of it. The bike is to me more than two wheels and a lot of dirt. It is a statement of intent, a badge of office, of membership of the It's Not My Fault Club. But I still don't like riding much, especially uphill, especially on a hot summer's day, especially yesterday, when the exhaust from the cars with bikes on the roof racks, among many other polluters, made it almost impossible to breathe. And yet I made it all the way up our only local hill system just before the rain set in. There I stayed, probably reeking quietly, but the person I had been visiting had an incontinent dog to smell around, and so never got as far as sniffing me, although the dog did. After a while of doing what I had cycled there to do, I realized my moment of departure was almost on me. Subtracting my journey time from my ETA back at the house, I had 20 or so minutes to wrap up the proceedings. I bid a fond and grateful farewell to my host, and departed in plenty of time to make it back. I had to return for family reasons. My partner was looking after another child, as well as our own two, and had taken him off to see a few more somewhere else. A perfectly appropriate thing to do, but the other mother knew nothing of this late arrangement, and would arrive to retrieve her son from a dark and empty home if I couldn't get there first to keep her from undue panic. Then it started raining. A lot. Well, more than a lot. Torrential. Just the sort of rain that would make a front wheel float above rather than grip onto the road. Not ideal conditions for making a trip at all. Certainly not for attempting one up or down any sort of hill and any sort of traffic. Being summer, I deduced that the rain would die out soon, and so I started recomputing the travel time home. First to go was the time lost going uphill, there being more of the down variety on the return trip. 10 minutes of heavy rain later, I subtracted time lost through bothering to change gear. Getting uphill is only possible for me if I change the gear ratio a bit. It was on the way in that I noticed that several of the cogs on my back wheel's gear assembly were no longer attached to the wheel itself, and so my feet went round even faster than is normal when I try going uphill. Having never attempted to use the other gears on the flat, this had come as a nasty surprise between two buses. The rain continued. Last to go was the in plenty of time part of my plan, but soon that was rained out as well. I have never been fond of hope. Hope it was which then dawned in the shape of my friend, offering me a lift home. To take advantage of this, I had to remove my front wheel, deflating it to get past the brake blocks. Reluctantly, I destroyed my only chance of a self-powered journey home. As the last of the 80 pounds psi air pressure irrevocably hissed out of the tyre, the rain finally stopped. By then, I wouldn't have been able to get back safely anyway, and only a car could do the run fast enough to avert parental disaster, and so the option of the lift was still a good one. But I had left the dog out of my computations. The poor mutt had had to be carried everywhere ever since it exhausted its officially allotted lifespan and started living a borrowed, if smelly, earthbound afterlife. It seemed like an age as it was being gently brought down the now seemingly enormous stairwell, which I had not even noticed on the way in. At least the bike did fit in the car. Even better, it didn't damage any part of it, that I noticed, getting it in. The dirt got everywhere, though. With the bike where the dog normally travelled, space had to be found for it in the front with my feet. It was a big dog, and I'm a big person. It was a small car, and the dog dribbled as well as farted. By the time I had to be home, we had at least started the trip back. Next problem was the traffic, through which I now watched fellow cyclists carefully weaving ahead of us. Then it was a stop on the way for petrol that annoyed me. But eventually I arrived at what looked like a dark and empty house containing an anxious ringing phone. My family and the spare mite were in after all, but his mother was not. As I feared, the worst had happened some 15 minutes earlier as my tyre had hissed its last. She had come and gone, then phoned to find out we were back and that no one was damaged, save my status as a reliable person. All was well, though I must be several pounds lighter and my lungs several shades darker. The bike is being repaired now. I think I'll stick to using the phone in future. A deflated view of the flat.
When I first attempted to enter the big wide world of home ownership, I had no idea that it would be so easy. Many people had told me that they couldn't see how anyone could afford a home of their own these days, so nor could I. But money isn't the problem at all. It's getting the right sort of building that I find so hard. There are hundreds of them, but I was normally several decades late inasmuch as they were already filled in with other people. But I can never see how they managed to afford to live there either. But there they were, and so I couldn't be. Mark you, that was near the top end of the home market, the detached house in central Ealing. I didn't give even a passing thought to new buildings of any description. They may well be strong enough, but they must be to cope with the rigours of supporting multiple stories of cars. But must everyone look as though that were its only purpose? Anyway, I don't like windows. The next acceptable level down from my ideal appeared to be the semi. The main problem there was, is, and will be, the price, perfect though it is otherwise. Therefore, another step down in price must be considered. Around Ealing, that is the Victorian conversion. Cheaper not because of the age, but the conversion. The windows! People will rip out anything that looks as if it might once have been the original wood and use metal or plastic replacements made to look like wood. They must know by now that they won't last an eighth of the life of the real thing, but that doesn't stop them. Far from increasing the value of their improved property, the results look so bad that it and the rest of the road goes down in price. Too often the once proud townhouse must suffer the indignity of yet further modernisation. Why do people convert a home into a car park? It's happening all over London, and I expect elsewhere as well. It's not as if transport is impossible without a car, but no, they dig up the garden, tarmac over its overly fertile loam, and park something on it that is 2 foot longer than the original length, plus that regained by the removal of the period wall, leaving the pavement thereby the 2 foot narrower. Later, the more subhuman owners further improve the off-street parking by bringing the car into the very home, a room to call its own. They knock out the bay window and install an aluminium up-and-over garage door. Some may remove the ceiling rose, but most don't. I wouldn't even be surprised if the ducks are flying up the wall still. So I have to look even further down the price market again, but this time up in quality. This time to the Victorian conversion flat. I know a road that some twit or other had his eye on for a really big conversion. From valuable to absolute tat with cars on, a new town centre in up to the minute 30 years ago old-fashioned concrete. I also knew that no way was the road as doomed as the prices indicated. The new plan was thought of 15 years earlier and looked old then, so the local worthies got together to stop it. Once the rest of the thriving central population heard of all of this, it realised it must have been living in slum conditions all those years. The council said so, so it must be true. Immediately the good people of Ealing started to act as the slum dwellers they had been told they were. The area plummeted. This was not helped by the compulsory purchase orders slapped on most things as fast as possible and then left for years to fall to bits. The council of those dim and distant times could and did use this as a reason to pull the lot down. They failed. It took 10 years or so of constant struggle, but once the old plan was dropped and the new centre had been accepted by the good people of Ealing, there were a lot of cheap flats for sale. I found a flat that was still condemned. My advisers told me not to buy it, as it was a bit smelly. The back garden bordered a busy building site, and the landlord was mad, but undaunted, I pushed on. In this putative little gem, at least the structure was sound. It had stood for over 100 years, and unless it was still in the path of a bypass I hadn't heard of, would stand for another 100 with little trouble. Now, a surveyor wouldn't tell you that. The council's man had already put a condemned notice on it. When mine came round to having a look, he spent half an hour with many of my pounds expertly doing what I had already done for nout in a few minutes. He said, damp, 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 as he stuck a special dampometer onto the wall. I used my hand. If I can't feel damp, I don't care. Sound, solid, firm, as he tapped at the walls, jumped on the floor and rattled the sashes. Good enough, as he looked up at the roof and judged the tilt of the chimney stacks. Did you know they're supposed to lean in a bit? And then he said, No way would I buy this. Too true, mate. I got there first, so I bought it. Why did I buy through an estate agent? I knew the place existed even before hearing of Cole and Hicks, so why did they get 200 quid? Why, for that matter, did any solicitor get ditto for writing a few letters that I had to follow up with phone calls anyway? I still don't have the courage of my convictions that I can do the whole thing myself, but that is another story. Anyway, on to the nub of my gist. Even when you get your flat, the money not being too hard to find unless you smoke, drink, drive and eat your way through your deposit before you save it, you actually have to live there. The pure horror of water through the ceiling, of the lights being ripped up by the home improvement cowboy above, the roof tar and cement down the drains, I could go on, I will. The scaffolding in the back garden, the builders working on it, watching you unexpectedly on the lav, the fact the landlord was mad after all, these are all things that I knew at the time I would look back on one day and laugh about. Now is still too soon. It is the dealings with the mad landlord that I can now smile at. My parents were right in that. A good property, but he was dotty. Worse, he was nasty. Even worse, he lived in the flat above. He was a man whose lifestyle you can't live with if you live underneath it. At the start, I didn't, as he sold the flat above soon after I moved in, and moved out himself. The set who moved in were a joy. Oh, what fun to hear are the goings-on of an unhappy couple. Coupling or not, they were quite obtrusive. It is extraordinary the amount you can learn of a life just by working out which room is which above your head. A shouting match, many thumps and crashes, quiet sobbing and consoling, then more shouts, dying down at last to a gentle murmur that slowly grew louder. These soon pulsate in time to a rhythmic creaking, with a very odd shout thrown in. Eventually the pulse ceases, but the noise only abates for a bit. Now frantic walking around, drawers and cupboards being banged, taps and showers run, and then the shouting again. All this can just be heard over the background of the fridge, freezer, washing machine, TV, radio, hairdryer, etc. The really daft bit is that if I ever met them, they were very nice to each other, and neither of them creaked a bit. Did I mention it was the freeholder who made life there impossible? Due to his nastiness, he was lonely. He took it out on anyone he felt deserved his wrath. The events were not of importance, but the horror of having your own home become unpleasant due to somebody living above it can't be overstated. Before any animosity had set in, it is quite possible to live in almost total ignorance of your neighbour, be they your freeholder or no, but once the balloon has gone up, not a breath will escape your lips without thinking that it might be due cause for complaint from it. You try always to be in the right, because only from there can you feel safe enough to complain to it about it. It fills your every moment, even when what it does would not normally affect you in any way. Now you know exactly what it is doing at every moment it is in range. You trace its footsteps, which are now too loud to miss, but too quiet to track easily. So you have to strain your ears to be annoyed at what you're hearing. Rest is impossible. The phone will ring. Always it'll be it complaining about something, or so at least you expect. You are on edge at all times. So is everyone around you, which makes things worse. You are rude for no good reason, save that you have been wound up to breaking point by the smallest of actions on behalf of it. The terrible thing is that it is doing it deliberately after all. In any case, the only solution was to move. I am incapable of standing such constant pressure. Do not fear. There is life after the flat, but it has taken me 4 more moves to settle down. The fireplace has always played a central role in family life. For years, people sat around them, watching the little flames eat their way through small bits of anything that had been finished with and put into the grate. Fire has always held a fascination for people. It can do so very much. In the ancient past, fire was worshipped as a worthy god, but today, even having a fire as a pet has become old-fashioned. Back in the days of the Empire, everyone was at it. Houses were built with a fire kennel in every room. Why do we leave them empty and forlorn these days? Surely the vandalism in our streets would diminish a bit if there was something other than next door's Fiat to set fire to. Maybe one day a fire brick will revert to being something to burn things on, rather than being the lighter sort of missile available on demolition sites with which to vent one's homeless spleen. What was it about people in the 1950s that made them take out their splendid iron chapels of burning and replace them with modern hovels of brown tile? Whatever it was, that mindless fashion is long past, but unfortunately even today the occasional fireplace and surround make it into the great dustbin in the sky by way of a skip. When going round houses looking for a new place to live, it is sensible to check that there are at least a few altars to the great god Fire still resident. That way you will save a lot of time looking for one in the piles of wreckage left by home-improving builders. Today, everyone who wants to be seen as being the sort of person too laid back to need to be seen is trying to find the old style of fireplace again. The places for living that such people purchase not only lack a fireplace to replace, but haven't even need of a chimney. All the same, period fittings, the vestiges of destroyed homes and gardens of the past, are now eagerly sought after to create a non-existent history for the new designer cells. These boxes are often built on sites modernized by the demolition of the buildings today's homeowners want to recreate. These original features can be found for sale at Camden Lock. Just about anything that is old and rare can be bought in these places. It would not be too surprising to find plastic facsimiles somewhere, slightly too small to use, made in a colour that can't be matched even with matchpots, bearing a fire hazard sticker next to the kite mark. Probably they would be on the same stalls that sell horse brasses for pubs. Anyway, few people can afford a new old fireplace, plastic or real, so it's easier and less expensive to move to a place that has never had any dealings with the up-to-the-minute facility buyers of any past-fashion generation. Having found such a home, completely original in every respect, it will badly need total redecoration. The problem with an old fire in a place one would like to look new is that the Victorian splendour has often been left to moulder under several layers of yellowed paint. The front of the fireplace will be walled up with hardboard that has been left for so long that it's weaker than compressed dust. In front of this will be a gas fire that might burn the house down if you stand the smell of gas long enough to light it. As hateful as this neglect is, it is better by far than total renovation. When the previous occupant has had enough money to do real damage, some of the most disgusting of their atrocities have to stay. All too often the hearth has been removed and the gap in the wall plastered over. The edges of this bit of DIY always show up very clearly, even in the dark. The amount of work needed to correct it is just too huge. Life itself seems unimportant by comparison, so it's left for the next owner to ignore. Assuming the fireplace is still there, the main problem in redecorating it is the aged paint. The last million or so people before you who have tried the customary opening up of the hearth mostly took one tentative glance behind the hardboard and gave up. But unfortunately, enough people to cause real problems go a bit further. These more energetic sods have even tried scraping off the old paint. The fire will now have patches of cracked paint falling off in an encouraging way, tempting the new homeowner to remove the lot. After 10 or so minutes' work, with the end of a spoon all these shiftable bits will be in the hair, eyes and throats of the renovator, leaving the rest stuck solidly to the metal. At this point, any sane person would have given up and put back the hardboard, but some twits must have thought it would be a good idea to give the slowly reappearing iron a nice lick of paint. The rats! The old paint edges under the new coat are even more obvious bodge than filling the whole thing in with cement would have been. Trying to shift that lot is a job that makes putting paint on the Forth Road Bridge a simple matter. It would be easier to paint over the other three as well, rather than try it. So even the staunchest advocate of authenticism gives in when faced with such an unequal task and reaches for the Dulux. The problem is far from solved with this cop-out. Simply buying the paint and hoping to finish the job in the afternoon is rather touching. The paint gets everywhere but the brush. Well, the bristles of the brush. That dog in the paint advert is most to blame. It's very misleading. The advertising standards people could have had a field day there. If a pot of that particular product had ever been opened anywhere near that supercilious canine, dog hair would have mixed in with the paint so fast as not to be believable. But as we all know, the camera never lies, so the dog has to be magic. It must have had a spell put on it by the manufacturers or the RSPCA to keep the doggy free from harm. This could explain another frequent difficulty if paintbrushes have bristles made from its fur. So often the stuff slides off the brush and onto the handle, leaving the business end perfectly paint-free. The amateur painter does not fare as well. By then they will be dripping with the non-drip, having found it to be non-spread. It won't drip because it won't come out of the pot, save to get onto the hands and shirt. How does the stuff get between the shoulders? Most people can't even reach there, but the paint can. By dint of keeping it long enough and using the now well-dead shirt as a replacement non-home-charmed brush, a new covering can be put onto the long-suffering ironwork. That difficulty over, a well-painted fireplace is a delight. Make sure the black bits are a real fire brick black, or they will glow nicely red if you ever use the fire grate. Another life can seem short trying to convince people in the shop that the stuff exists, but the effort is worth it. Gloss paint could be preferred for a fire that has seen its last hot glimmer. White surround and black for the rest. A striking and fit temple to an understandable god of the Victorian house and home. One day, maybe a new generation will be flocking to Camden heliports to buy solid holograms of the very rare brown earth-tiled hearths, wondering how we could ever have been so crass as to destroy them by the thousand. Maybe today's new paint will be yellow by then, but at least the dog will be long gone.